The rain had been falling since dawn, soft at first, then heavier, as if the sky itself wept for the forgotten souls of the city. And among those streets slick with water and reflection walked a boy no older than 17 named Eli, his worn sneakers slapping against the pavement as he hurried from the cafe where he worked part-time, clutching the tip jar he'd promised to drop at his mother's hospital before closing. He was thin, quiet, and used to going unnoticed, yet that day, something in the air felt different, like fate had twisted a thread just for him. And as he turned the corner toward the underpass where buses rumbled through the drizzle, he noticed an old man sitting alone beside a rusted shopping cart, soaked to the bone, clutching a cardboard sign that had almost dissolved into mush, its faded letters still whispering veteran, hungry, anything helps. And though hundreds of people had passed that way before, none had slowed down because in a city that never slept, kindness often fell silent. Eli hesitated, watching cars hiss by, his breath misting in the cold. Then, without overthinking it, he walked toward the old man, pulling the hood from his head and kneeling beside him. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling from both nerves and the chill. But the man only gave a weak nod, his lips purple, eyes dull with exhaustion. Eli looked at the tip jar in his hand. $12.76. Not much, but it was all the man needed right now. And without hesitation, he placed the jar in the man's lap, whispering, "You need this more than me." The man blinked in disbelief, shaking his head, trying to return it, but Eli simply smiled and said, "Please, my mom would want me to help." That name, Mom, stirred something deep in the man's chest. He hadn't heard his daughter call him Dad in almost 20 years. As Eli stood to leave, the man's raspy voice croaked, "What's your name, son?" "Eli," he replied softly before walking off, disappearing into the mist like a ghost of goodness the world forgot. Hours later, Eli sat by his mother's hospital bed, her pale hand resting in his. She'd been sick for months, and the bills had swallowed every bit of their savings. Yet she smiled whenever he entered the room, as if his presence alone made her pain fade. He didn't tell her about the money. He just told her that he believed good things were coming. And that night, as she drifted into sleep, he whispered, "I helped someone today. Mom, I think it's what you taught me for." Across the city, the old man sat in a diner, warm for the first time in days, eating soup with trembling hands while the waitress smiled. And as he counted the change Eli had given, he found a folded note inside the jar. "If you ever get the chance, pass it on. The world needs it." The words hit him like sunlight through storm clouds. That night he slept behind the diner, his heart strangely alive again. Days passed, then weeks, and fate began its quiet weaving. Because what Eli didn't know was that the old man wasn't just anyone. His name was James Harland, once a decorated soldier, later an engineer, and long ago he'd worked for the very hospital where Eli's mother now lay. When life fell apart, addiction, loss, shame, he vanished into the streets. But Eli's kindness had reopened a door he thought was forever locked. The next morning, James walked into the hospital cleaned up, holding the note in his hand, determined to do something meaningful again. He asked for volunteer work, anything, and soon he was pushing patients' wheelchairs through sunlit hallways, greeting families, making small repairs no one else bothered with. Then one afternoon, while tightening a loose railing outside the oncology ward, he heard a familiar voice. Eli's, humming quietly as he handed his mother flowers, and James froze. He didn't know whether to speak or hide, but when Eli turned and saw him, recognition flickered like lightning, and before either could say a word, Eli's mother smiled weakly and said, "You must be Mr. Harland. My son told me about you." That was how their lives began to braid together, 2 generations healing each other without realizing it. James started spending his lunch breaks with Eli's mother, telling her stories of the old days, of battles won and lost, of the daughter he'd failed and the guilt he carried. In return, she shared her hope that her son would grow up with kindness intact despite hardship. Eli would visit after work, finding them laughing, sharing tea, and for the first time in years, he saw his mother's eyes light up like before she got sick. One evening, when a sudden coughing fit shook her frail body, James held her hand as Eli ran for the nurse. Later, in the dim hospital corridor, James placed a hand on Eli's shoulder and said quietly, "You gave me a second chance to be the man I was meant to be. Let me help you now." And help he did. Over the next few months, James worked every spare shift, saving his meager paychecks, calling in old contacts, and slowly building a plan. Eli's mother's medical debt was steep, but kindness moves faster than money sometimes. One cold morning, James appeared at the billing office and slid an envelope across the counter, filled with donations he'd gathered from former colleagues, hospital staff, even strangers who had heard the story of the boy who gave away his last tip jar to save a stranger. The news spread quietly through the hospital. Whispers of "the kindness kid" filled break rooms and corridors. And one evening, a local journalist heard it too, writing an article titled "The Boy Who Believed in Good." Within days, it went viral. People from all over sent letters, money, and prayers. The hospital's director, moved to tears after reading the article, called Eli and his mother into his office and said, "Your story reminded me why I started this job." He tore up the final bill right in front of them. Eli's mother wept, clutching her son, while James watched from the doorway, tears streaming down his weathered face. Life slowly found color again. Eli's mother began to recover, her strength returning with each sunrise. James became like family, eating dinner with them every weekend, fixing things around their apartment, laughing like a man reborn. And then one summer afternoon, months later, a black SUV pulled up outside the hospital. And a woman stepped out, mid-30s, strong features, same blue eyes as James. It was his daughter, Sarah, who'd seen the viral story online and realized the boy who helped the old homeless man was the reason her father had come back to life. Their reunion in the hospital garden drew quiet tears from nurses watching through the windows. Sarah embraced her father for the first time in decades, whispering, "You came home, Dad." James looked at Eli and said, "He showed me the way." Time moved on, as it always does. But that single act, a boy giving his only tip jar to a stranger, had rippled through countless lives. The diner waitress who started feeding veterans for free, the journalist who left her job to start a kindness foundation, the hospital director who began a new fund for struggling families. Eli, now 18, received a scholarship letter one crisp autumn morning, anonymous donor, full tuition, though he already knew who it came from. On graduation day, his mother sat in the front row, healthy and proud, while James stood beside her, dressed in a clean suit with his service medal pinned to his chest, clapping the loudest when Eli's name was called. After the ceremony, Eli looked at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for teaching me that kindness always finds its way back." Years later, when Eli opened his own community center, small, bright, filled with laughter, he hung a framed note by the entrance, the same one that once sat in a homeless man's trembling hands. "If you ever get the chance, pass it on. The world needs it." People who entered read those words and often cried without knowing why, because kindness once born never dies. It just changes hands, and sometimes the smallest act from a young heart can echo louder than any fortune, proving that heroes don't always wear badges or ride motorcycles. Sometimes they just wear worn sneakers, carry a tip jar, and believe against all odds that the world can still be good.